Hi, it's Steve with Palladino Power Project, bringing you another video in the series on modifying a static training plan. This one is adjusting the relative intensity that's prescribed in static training plans. We'll focus primarily on these higher intensities. In the easy run, it's less than or equal to 80% of a valid CP, and beyond that, conversational effort is the primary guide, and people can be anywhere from 80% down to 75% or even lower than that when they're running an easy aerobic run, as long as they're at conversational pace. Um, so let's look at these higher intensities and how you might adjust them if you want to get things finer tuned for yourself, more individualized. This series, this is actually the fourth in the series. I'm just putting this slide up here to mention that I'm putting together a playlist, the Modifying a Static Training Plan series playlist. It has all these videos, but these are the first three that I did. I will put the links for each of those three in the description of this video, along with the link to the playlist, to the entire playlist. So let's get on with adjusting relative intensity in a static training plan. Now, why am I using this word relative intensity? Well, absolute intensity would be just some number, some watts. Uh, Relative intensity means it's relative to some reference point. So in this case, in most of the training plans, it's relative to a percent of a valid critical power or functional threshold power, which are essentially the same concept. So it's a relative intensity to those values. You could have relative intensity relative to power at VO2 max. You could have it relative to half marathon power. It can go on and on. What the intensity is relative to, but in the run power paradigm, the predominant relativity is to CP FTP. So, just that I had to mention that with regard to what I mean by relative intensity. So we're looking to adjust those numbers for the individual, and maybe based on your experience, oh, this one is a bit too hard. This one is a little bit too light. We might want to shift it 1% up or 1% down. So let's look into that a little bit. I have put this together. These are some recommendations. It's sort of a work in progress, but it's pretty close. These are recommendations for each level based on your critical power, functional threshold power in watts per kilogram. And these are the recommended intensities. All right. And you'll see that as I go through this, that most of these are about 3% wide, the target range. More than that, you start getting into a difference of stimulus, a significant difference of stimulus if you're, let's say this is 5 or 6%. If you're executing at the top of the range, that's a whole different stimulus than at the bottom of the range. So let's say this is marathon power for level 3. Let's say we widen this by 2% on either side, so now it's 5% wide. Well, up here, 91%, you're getting, for this level, you're getting closer to half marathon power. And at the bottom, you're just a little bit too low, below expected percent of critical power you'll be executing for a marathon. So I keep them at 3% wide, and remember that the target range is not that every second your power has to be in that range. So there's going to be times when your power is higher, say at the beginning as you start at an interval and you back off, and you may over back off and it goes down below. There's going to be some excursions above and below, but the targets are intended for the lap power, the average power of that specific interval or that specific tempo segment. All right. So that work segment is the intention is the target is for the average power of that segment. So, it's if it's 86 to 89%, and you finish up one interval at 86%, another one at 88%, another one at 89, then at 87, you did it. Even though during those intervals you may have gone up above and below that range. All right, so most of these are 3% wide. It gets wider for the higher intensity ones. So look at this one is, intensive max aerobic power reserve work capacity intervals. That's 8% wide because there's more variability across a population that accounts for this wider range. When you're down close to threshold and even below, when you're close to threshold, the ranges are not going to change that much across levels. When you're below threshold, critical power, these ranges are determined by the duration that it would take to cover a half marathon or marathon. And subsequently, because longer duration is lower relative power, that's what impacts these values below threshold. And above threshold, it's the reserve work capacity, the individual work capacity that will change that. A low reserve work capacity is going to mean closer to the bottom end of that range, and a high reserve work capacity means this is the more appropriate target. So if you look at what your plan is saying, number one, I would first recommend that you correct it to a 3% wide range. All right, using this table as a guideline. And you can just freeze this table and take a screenshot if you want. Make it 3% wide for the most cases, of course, down in these really higher intensities, it'll be wider. But follow this table. And let's say that you're finding, okay, the super thresholds are really hard for me. Let's say I'm level 4. They're really hard for me here at 101 to 103. Okay, I'm gonna drop it to 100 to 102 and run with that for a while and just try to get all of my intervals in that target zone. All right. So this is going to be the baseline for your level. Say level 4. That's your baseline, but you're saying, oh, I'm really having a hard time with these max aerobic power intervals. Okay, shift yourself down a level. All right. So that's one way of fine-tuning these. One is get the target range to about 3%, except for these really higher intensity interval types. Get it down to 3% wide range, and then follow this table for your level. And if you're having trouble or you're finding one level's, let's say this is max aerobic power intervals are too easy, bump up to level 5 for that particular interval set. All right. So that's one way to adjust things. Another way is to use the final surge individualized interval power target calculator, which I built after some study, and I'll put the link to the background documentation for how this came about, this one. So as I mentioned outside, most training plans, power training plans for runners are based around a percentage of CP, critical power or functional threshold power. However, as you get into higher and higher intensities, as I also mentioned, the person's individual reserve work capacity plays a role in what's the appropriate target. So I built this to further individualize based on the individual's critical power and reserve work capacity. Now, if you're using something like Stride Auto CP, they do not provide reserve work capacity, which, by the way, is also W prime in their other contexts. So it's not provided. So to get this, you actually have to input your data into like a linear 1/time critical power model and get both critical power and reserve work capacity. Then you can plug it into this calculator, which then for each of these, I'm going to go back a slide. So for super threshold, let's say level 4 is 101 to 103, all right, for super threshold. Well, let's take max aerobic power because it's getting a little bit higher intensity. So 103 to 106 for level 4, all right. This person, let's say they're level 4 and their critical power is 320 and their reserve work capacity is 11.5, max aerobic power intervals, which that's how I name them. I use this naming convention. It's recommending 105 to 110 for this individual, all right? So let's go a little bit more into this calculator and where to find it and how to use it. So first, if you're on Final Surge, and by the way, athletes, to get a Final Surge account, it's free. And so even if you don't use Final Surge training plans, you still have a calendar, and it has in the beta mode, first make sure it's in beta mode, the calendar. There's this icon here, which is for calculators. Click on that icon, and you'll come to a number of different calculators: Hanson's, Macmillan, Tinman, Palladino. And I have 4 different calculators, and this is the first one that comes up, is the Individualized Interval Power Target Calculator. All right, so let us go into playing around with this in a more live mode using the calculator. All right, so here we are on an individual's calendar, and we're in the beta mode, and we come down here in the far right column, there's an icon for calculators. See, when I hover over it, it says calculators, and I'll click on that, and the various workout calculators are available, and you can click on the other ones if you want, but this is where this particular calculator resides, is under my calculators that I've built. And I'll just scroll down. That's the Individualized Interval Power Target Calculator. Then there's a CP calculator from using 2 test values. There is a CP calculator for entering race data that's over about 40 or 50 minutes long. And then there's a CP calculator for entering race and test data that is less than 40 minutes. So if you have a 5K, you plug it in here, click it, and you could find your estimated CP based on that 5K alone. Or let's say a half marathon, you put it in here, follow that as an exponent table, etc. But let's get back to this video and this calculator. So let's play around with it. Let's say we have a person with a 280 watt CP, and let's say their reserve work capacity is about 8.0 kilojoules, all right? Click that, and here are the targets, the target range that's individualized for that individual with that critical power and that reserve work capacity. And so going back to max aerobic power intervals, it's recommending that it's 291 to 302. The width here is 4%, which is fine. 104 to 108%. You can see the width as it gets more intense. The width gets a wider target range because it's harder to hit target, hold target. So this is 16% wide. This is 8% wide, 4% wide. This is 2%. This is 2%. All right. So let's just look at this max aerobic power. All right, it's recommending 104 to 108% based on the background work that I did in building this calculator. Again, the link in the description of this video. So let's say we take another runner who has the same critical power, all right, but their reserve work capacity is closer to, let's say that it is 12, all right? Now, before I click that, let's remember this. This is 104 to 108 for max aerobic power intervals, all right? 104 to 108. Now I'm going to click this, and we'll see how it changes. All right, max aerobic power, for this individual with a higher reserve work capacity, you can see 106 to 112%. So much higher because the reserve work capacity is higher for that person's critical power, 280. So this calculator gives the individual even further individualization of their interval power targets versus a table or versus what comes with the static plan. So there you have it. That is, in my opinion, is the most elaborate way of achieving individualized interval power targets and adjusting your relative intensity. So you can get in there, and whether it's from a table, the table I presented earlier, or this, you can refine and adjust your relative intensity. Now all you need to do is open up the structured workout and change your percentages around, if that is something that is accessible with your membership, etc. All right, so there you have it. That's how we adjust these targets, and you can use the table, you can use the calculator, but if you're feeling that you want to go beyond what's recommended in the static plans, there are the methodologies for doing so. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.